everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm the GCSE science teacher. In today's video, we are going to be learning about evolution and speciation, which is a fantastic topic for GCSE biology students. I hope you guys are enjoying learning about this. I have other videos linked to it, like variation, evolution in general as well, which I'll link in the description box for you. And if you do have any questions, I know we're soon approaching the GCSE exam season. So if you would like specific content or helpful tips or anything like this, I have a few videos on my channel already, but if there is anything specific you would like me to focus on, please do feel free to contact me in the comment section and I'll get back to you. But thank you so much as well for all of your kind support here on YouTube and on my other platforms as well. I really do appreciate it. There's so many of you now, which is incredible. If you're brand new here, if you've never seen me before, I'm a real life science teacher. I do make videos like this one in my spare time to help students like yourself get better grades. And ultimately enjoy science and learn more about it. So thank you so much for all your support. I hope you enjoy this video. So evolution and speciation, like I said, is the topic today. And we've got to kind of go back in time to 1831, which is where Charles Darwin set sail on a ship called HMS Beagle. And he did this with his colleagues to explore the natural world. And at the time, you know, in the 1800s, there wasn't the smartphone, there wasn't technology like we know today. They didn't have that much access to the wider world. So going on a ship like this to actually explore the world around them was an incredible experience and once in a lifetime opportunity. So Charles Darwin grabbed this with both hands and went to sail around the world. And in 1835, he actually ended up near the coast of Ecuador, around 600 miles away. This is called the Galapagos Islands. It's actually still an island today, and people do visit it in small groups. But essentially, in 1835, he ended up in the Galapagos Islands and stayed there for several weeks to explore the world around him in that island. And at that time, like I said, there wasn't really anything that they could do except draw, read, write, and learn about the world around them. So he had a lot of time to think about the place that he was and to actually make a lot of observations, which he later wrote up in a book called Origin of Species, which absolutely blew the socks off the scientific community and is something that a lot of scientists refer to today, and really changed the way people thought about humans in the wider ecosystem and how humans have evolved over time and things like this. So it was a huge breakthrough bit of research that he later went on to do. So in the Galapagos Islands, he studied a lot of species like finches, which are small little birds. He looked at tortoises, he looked at different animals, and he took a lot of species back with him in his trip. And during that time, like I said, he had a lot of time to think about it. So when he returned in 1838, Darwin actually was able to write up a lot of his findings, but he didn't publish any of his findings at this time. So although from the beginning, setting sail in 1831, all the way until 1838, he had a whole catalogue of information, but he didn't publish anything. And this was mainly due to his background. So he had family members that had been ostracized from the scientific community for their ideas. So he saw that firsthand. He saw what it would be like if he was to come out with a bit of research that wasn't really respected or well liked. He also knew that at the time, a lot of people were very religious and believed God had a huge influence in how things were developed in the current time that he was in. So he didn't want to cause a rift between his own beliefs, other people's beliefs, and obviously the scientific community, because he didn't want people to think that he was coming up with these ideas that would essentially contradict what the church was saying, because that was quite a big thing to do at the time. We don't have social media at that time. There wasn't going to be a lot of support for it. So he didn't really know how to present his ideas. So he sat on his ideas for a long time, but he had them there nevertheless. However, he did write up a few small bits of research, things that he'd found, not suggesting anything about natural selection and evolution, but he did come up with, a few little research papers here and there. And he started to build a bit of a reputation for himself in the scientific community. People started to respect him as a scientist who'd been on this big voyage and had lots of detailed drawings and things like this. So inspired by this incredible work that he had done, there was another individual called Alfred Russel Wallace, who actually saw Darwin's work and started to come up with his own ideas of natural selection, which very much coincided with Darwin's. So he wrote to him. Wallace wrote to Darwin and said, he has this idea of natural selection based on his research that Darwin had done. It looked like actually this is a possible idea, and he wanted to publish. However, Darwin at the time was thinking, well, I've got the same ideas as well. I haven't published it, but if I don't publish my work now, this individual called Wallace, who's written to me, is going to publish and he will get credit. So Darwin decided to put all of his research together in a book called Origin of Species, and this was published in 1859. He did give credit to Wallace in his notes to say that he also came up with a similar idea. So there was some sort of recognition there. However, obviously, we know that throughout scientific history at least, a lot of people along the way don't necessarily get the credit that they are due. That is a whole nother video, a whole nother story. But essentially, yeah, he wrote his Origin of Species. And this, like I said, absolutely revolutionized the way people thought about humans, because essentially Darwin was saying in this book that humans have evolved from lower species, or species that were more primitive in nature, and that we somehow, in looking at this theory of evolution, humans have linked ancestors to other animals currently on Earth, like apes and things like this. So it completely changed the way people thought about our place in the world. And this is the sort of theory that we go with, because there was other theories at the time as well, which I'll get into later. But this theory of natural selection is how we kind of see how evolution has occurred. So it is still considered a theory, as is science, until we get better evidence, better information. We then change our ideas or we adapt them. So you actually may have heard of survival of the fittest, and this is kind of a phrase that's linked to evolution and Charles Darwin, but a lot of people don't really understand what this means. So evolution itself is just defined as a change to the inherited characteristics of a population over time. And this happens through a process which Charles Darwin discovered called natural selection, and it's a theory of evolution. So there are other scientists, and I'll discuss that later on, that came up with different ideas of how evolution occurred. But Charles Darwin and his evidence suggests that natural selection was the most widely accepted one, because essentially what it's saying is there is a change to the environment which causes a selection pressure, causing those characteristics that are best suited to the environment to remain in the population and be passed on, as they're more favorable and help that organism to survive. Remember, we're talking about animals, we're talking about plants, we're talking about bacteria, and other living organisms as well. And essentially this happens over a really long period of time, so that those different phenotypic characteristics, those different features, can be passed on. And this often occurs due to a chance mutation, a random mutation, that causes that beneficial characteristic. And like I said, this takes long periods of time, millions of years, billions of years. So really, when we look at things like climate change, we know that this is going to have a big impact on living organisms, because climate change happens very quickly in comparison to something like evolution, which takes millions of years. Because the climate is changing quite rapidly in comparison, organisms don't necessarily have the amount of time needed to cause those mutations to occur, so that they can adapt to that environment as quickly as they need to. And this can lead to things like extinction of species or endangered species, a whole topic which I'm going to cover on my channel, so definitely subscribe so you don't miss that. Also, evidence of evolution. Some of you might be thinking, well, what evidence do we actually have? Well, we have evidence in the form of fossil records. We also have bones and other living organisms, dead tissue, that we can actually look at and analyze. So again, I'll do a video on the evidence of evolution, and link that to the antibiotic resistant bacterial strains that we're seeing, such as MRSA, and different mutations that occur in the bacterial world as well. So I'll do a whole video on that, to link with this one, because that is something you do need to know, some of the evidence that we have for evolution too. So what exactly is speciation? Well, species in itself is an organism that can breed and produce fertile offspring. So if you have a parent organism, it can have a child organism, which can then have their own children, and so on. We have things called hybrids. They can't reproduce. So a species, the key bit that you need to know for GCSE is that they can reproduce to form fertile offspring. So essentially, how do different species evolve from a single original ancestor? Well, usually what happens is that species will develop within the population when they are geographically isolated from one another. So let's have a look at the idea of the finches, like I mentioned with Charles Darwin. He did a lot of work with finches, and these are just little birds that were living on the island. And the Galapagos Island is actually a collection of islands. So there was that geographical isolation where different breeds, or different species, as I should say, of birds were actually separated. Yes, they could fly, but most of them were separated quite a big distance away. So they had different selection pressures, they had different environments, and therefore they had different mutations which had occurred because of the environments that they were in. So certain species, like the ones I've labeled here, A, B, and C, they had different food available on those islands, and this caused different mutations to develop. This caused them to change their phenotype and change their, for example, their structure of their beak, so that they could consume that food. And the ones that had the best adaptation for those different types of foods, like the seeds or the berries, they were the ones that were able to pass on those genes to survive, and therefore they became more prevalent in that environment, and the population started to grow and develop and change. And Charles Darwin was able to see this as he walked through the Galapagos Islands and explored. He could see that different birds, although they were similar, they had very different beak shapes or feather colours and things like this. And this gave him the idea that depending on the environment that they're in will depend on the food that they have available, for example, or the predators that they're around, and therefore the exposure they have, and therefore how they can change over many generations. So this change occurs over many, many generations, like I said before. So other theories of evolution, like I mentioned, come from someone called Lamarck. There are lots and lots of other ideas, but these are the ones you really need to know for GCSE. Of course, Charles Darwin with natural selection, but Lamarck as well was another scientist at the time who believed and came up with the idea of essentially evolution through this idea that organisms can change within their lifetime. And a key example of this would be the giraffe analogy. This is often something you see, but let me talk you through it in case you haven't seen it. So we think of giraffes as we know of them as animals with very long necks, and they've adapted over time to have those long necks so they can reach the food source up in the trees in their natural habitat. However, Lamarck was saying that if there was no food available with the giraffe's normal environment, they would then need to elongate their necks further so that they could actually reach the very, very top branches. And he was saying essentially this evolution would occur literally spontaneously within that lifetime. So you'd have a giraffe in the first instance that was able to eat food, but then there was lots at the top of the tree that it couldn't reach. So it would just somehow stretch its neck to reach the very top branches. We know that this isn't possible really because we don't see this occurring. If you try and replicate this exact idea, those giraffes who want to reach the highest food source won't be able to, and therefore they will die out because they are not adapted to that environment. So what does happen is the ones that have the longest necks are the ones that would survive because they can reach the food source. They would survive and reproduce and pass those genes on to the next generation, and therefore leading to natural selection, that idea I've just discussed. So Lamarck's ideas were good at the time, but Charles Darwin and his theory of evolution through natural selection kind of said that this wasn't possible because there was too much evidence suggesting otherwise. So Lamarck is someone that you should consider when you're revising for your exams, because what they can do in the exam, they can ask you the names of different scientists. They could say, okay, what did this person do? What did this person do? Usually it's like a tick box question. It can be asking you as a science student to write, what did Charles Darwin do? What is evolution by natural selection? Those sorts of things. You might also be given different animals or plants or different species and explain what speciation is. That's something else I've seen as well. And that's it from me today. I've been the GCSE science teacher and you have been curious. Thank you so much for your time and support today. I hope this video, you found it helpful. If you did, let me know. Feel free to subscribe, join the community. I'll link some videos for you on the side here. Feel free to have a look at those. And also I'll put, like I said, in the description box, some more information about Charles Darwin if you'd like to read further. Thank you so much. Take care and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.